Okay. So what was, when was sovereignty, when did sovereignty become a norm of international relations? We mentioned in the historical background. What was the event that created the norm of sovereignty? What is the most important historical event you learned in the IR department in your courses? Okay, so, so I asked the question that way, you know. Okay, Westphalia is known to create the norm of sovereignty. Now I say norm of sovereignty, not a law. Why is that? What's the difference between a norm and a law? Not necessarily, but law is law is enforced usually, and there are punishment mechanisms to enforce laws, but norms are not like that, right? So not to be late to class is okay, not to be late to class is a law. At least from today on, it's a law. If it was a norm, it would be very polite not to be late, not to come in when the professor is talking. So a norm would not necessarily be enforced through punishment, but there is a social understanding in norms, okay? That's how a norm and a law are different. So sovereignty is not a law, so there is no enforcement of punishment if you violate sovereignty. But at the same time, it's a norm, and all states abide by the norm of sovereignty, because by Westphalia, states believed that sovereignty is the only way that will stop the fighting in Europe, okay, between great powers. So no one wants to fight. If you don't want to fight, the norm then is, do not interfere in my affairs. I'm not going to interfere with your affairs. But in the meantime, sovereignty has two components, internal and external. On the one hand, you can order your domestic affairs in any way that you want as the state, as long as you're legitimate, okay? And then the external component says everyone, every state in the international system has the same status. So if we go back to our discussion before the break, you were saying you don't believe that some states are, that the United Nations is very fair because some states are more powerful than others. The answer to that would be, from a sovereignty perspective, the answer would be, of course, some states might be more powerful. But in the system, the rights that states have are equal, not their power levels, okay? So some states are stronger, others are weaker, but they have the same status in international law. Do you see the difference? So in this classroom, Orkun might be extremely strong. He goes to gym every day, and so does Magnus, okay? But, okay, I'm not going to pick guys for the example anymore. Can I pick you instead? Okay, so you don't go to the gym all the time, so you're not as strong, okay? Strength then of the states in the system might differ. But in the meantime, you're all students. In the meantime, in the class of IR347, you all have the same status. But the fact is, if they want, Orkun and Magnus can beat the hell out of you, okay? But still, in this international system here, you have the same status as they do, okay? You might be weaker, but that has nothing to do with the status of the individual states within the state, within the international system. Okay? So you're all sovereign. You can do whatever you like, and no one can interfere in your affairs. Oh yeah, he's stronger, but that doesn't add anything to his sovereignty. So the norm of sovereignty is established to ensure that all of you have the same status, so that you're not going to interfere with each other's affairs, so that you will do whatever you deem is necessary inside your borders. But on the other hand, people argue, there are IR scholars who argue that because Magnus is stronger than you, he actually violates your sovereignty and nothing happens. That is the argument from a critical perspective, for example. Remember critical perspective we talked about? So from a critical perspective, weaker states become, weaker states' sovereignty and rights become violated by stronger states, and no one really does anything for that. UN, you said, is not fair. So in a situation where your right is violated, a critical theorist might argue that the UN doesn't do much for you because you're weaker and the stronger state will win. Okay, the argument in the UN. So guys, sovereignty is a norm, a concept that was supposed to bring peace to the international system, if you enforce it. But in the meantime, there aren't as many mechanisms as there should be to protect sovereignty of each state. That's the argument. Did you have a question?
If you want to provide equality among states.
Equality of what? Status or power?
Status and power.
Both? It's not possible though. Is it possible?
So in states, will be much more powerful than another states.
Okay, but is it possible?
Also, they will dominate another states. So you will not provide equality between states.
Okay.
Powerful states much more than powerful another states.
Let me ask. Okay, let me ask you all the question: is it possible to have equal levels of power among all the states? Of course not. Of course it's possible. Is it possible? Anything is possible is the answer. Okay, good answer. Is it, okay, how can we have every one of you as powerful as the other? So, you've been going to gym for the last 15 years. I'm making this up. Yes, so you're very strong. And Orkun has been going to gym for the last 14 years. Tülay has just started. So is it possible for Tülay to be as powerful as you are in the near future? Okay, let me see hands. Let me see hands.
If you use supplements, then it will be
Yes.
Okay, if you use supplements, pills, then you can become strong. In the meantime, though, you can get ill.
maybe not.
Or maybe not.
50-50 chance. If you want to get strong, you have to do it.
That's true. Haven't I told you that the affairs of the international system also depends on luck, chance as well? So there's 50-50 chance. True. Tülay might actually get as powerful as both of you guys, or she might actually die trying it with the supplements. Knock on the wood. Okay. Can we argue that everyone should actually try to become as powerful as these guys? The realist answer would be, sure. If you want to protect your national interest, increase your power, maximize your gains, minimize your costs. Why not? Yes?
Well, there are theories that say that like sovereignty is becoming, and the nation state is becoming less relevant, and we're moving to regional or global entities. So the EU being a starting example, and they believe this will occur in 100 years or so. And as sovereignty becomes weakened and there are more regional entities, then it does not matter if nations are more powerful than one another, because violations are far less likely to occur. For example, it would be far less likely for one EU member state to violate the sovereignty of another EU member state.
Okay.
Because the laws become strengthened.
This argument actually is becoming quite popular, guys. That states will become, the state system will become the way it was in 1200s or 1300s. So I think that's why this course becomes even more relevant, because we need to understand where we are coming from to be able to comment on, are we going in that direction again? So there are scholars, and a few of them actually visited Bilkent last year. They argue that the system is changing right now. Sovereignty is eroding. The invasion of Iraq is one example of it. So what happened to the sovereignty of Iraq, right? Or what happened to the sovereignty of Libya? What is happening to the sovereignty of all the other states that are experiencing what we call the Arab Spring? So is sovereignty going to erode as much that nation states will become meaningless in the future? That is one of the questions that we would like to answer, or at least it's a question we would like to ask. We may not answer all the questions we ask, but it is a question we want to ask. So, guys, from that perspective, internally and externally, a state is supposed to be free of intervention, free of interference from other states. Let me ask you a question. How about human rights violations? How about a state that's killing its own people? How about a state that is too poor, as in the case of Somalia, that its people are dying, are starving? So can we argue that sovereignty is the best solution or the best norm in the international system today with these issues? Mehmet.
There should be some intervention for interference.
Okay.
Because some poor countries, like Somalia, is incapable of maintaining the welfare of its citizens. So some other power or institution on the state should help. But this help is...
How much help?
Is considered.
Okay.
We have to consider the amount of help.
Okay.
It's not total being like states did.
There's a theory that I did not include in the introduction part, but the English school actually is a theory that mentions if intervention in other countries' wars or in other countries' problems is acceptable. And there are two views in the English school. One of those views is, it says that it's not okay to intervene in other states' issues because sovereignty is very important and order is very important. And if we intervene in other states' affairs, we no longer respect other states' sovereignty, and if we don't, order is going to be sacrificed for human rights and for the lives of the people in places like Somalia. So there are debates, again, as in everything in social sciences, there is debate in this topic as well. So how much of intervention is enough? How much of intervention actually breaches sovereignty? How about Libya? NATO forces intervened in Libya. Was there a breach of sovereignty there? The first question to ask is, when you ask the question of, was there breach of sovereignty? The first question is, well, the next question is, that should come first, is how strong or how much a state is indeed functioning as a state. Tell me, is Somalia a state that fits the definition of Max Weber. Isn't that an important criterion when deciding are we going to breach the sovereignty of the state or not? So in the case of Somalia, there are pirates. The central government is not able to control the situation. People are starving, and the central government is not able to provide basic services such as food to its people. So is then the state a proper state or a functioning state? If not, then is that state's sovereignty more open to intervention? Is it more acceptable to actually intervene in that state because that state is not functioning well as a nation state? That is the right question here to ask, okay? So let me ask you, there is Somalia, and within Somalia, there's actually an entity called Somaliland, and believes that it's independent. It has declared independence, okay? And it actually functions as a de facto state. "100 years ago, we didn't know these concepts. Now we do. Cyprus, right? Northern Cyprus. So only a couple countries actually recognize Northern Cyprus as a state. Turkey is one of those states. And so Northern Cyprus, from the perspective of other states in the system, is a de facto state because it is not internationally recognized. Palestine also is a de facto state. It functions as a state. Taiwan, it might be another example. There's another huge example, actually. What's? Kosovo actually got voted, right, for independence in the UN. So, guys, when we have, or actually, hold on, KRG, Kurdistan Regional Government, is a de facto state that is not an independent state, but in the meantime, it has all the functions that a nation state should be functioning. Well, that's the region, that's Iraq is a case that I'm studying for many years. So in the KRG, you have all the ministries. It's not supposed to have the foreign affairs ministry, but it has something equivalent to it. It's just not called the foreign ministry. So in that sense, when you have every possible trait of a nation state, you're functioning, literally functioning as a nation state, but you are not internationally recognized. So you have internal sovereignty, but you lack external sovereignty. That is a de facto state, okay? So we have come to an age where there are nation states and then there are de facto states. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, this was not really something that we would foresee. So I'm trying to actually show you that a lot that we don't foresee is happening in the system, has happened in the system. And this whole norm of sovereignty and definition of a nation state are concepts that are socially constructed, meaning they're constructed by people, okay? If someone actually did not think and say, oh, if states are sovereign, there would be less war. If no one actually made that causal connection, we would not have that norm. Okay? And if we didn't have that norm, who knows what would happen since 1648? Maybe things would be completely differently. Maybe we wouldn't have nation states. Okay? So, did you have a question?
I just wanted to say, from an international perspective, there are different views, and some would view Taiwan and Kosovo as states.
Absolutely.
The Vienna Convention has a series of requirements for statehood.
Yeah.
The one that's disputed for recognition is capacity to enter into international relations. One view is recognition is necessary for capacity. The other view is I may be capable to enter into international relations with you, irrespective of whether you recognize me or not, I still have a capacity, and therefore I am state based on the unity.
Absolutely. So in Taiwan's case, I think that the second case is pretty much it. You have the capacity, you're functioning as a state, and no matter who recognizes you, and there are countries that recognize Taiwan, but it's not recognized internationally, right? So guys, to be recognized, just to have recognition from 5 or 10 states is not enough. Usually it is a process in the UN, right? So Palestine actually started that process as well. Kosovo did that also. So you have to actually get into the process of recognition. So in other words, external component of sovereignty is about having equal status. But not only having that equal status, but also recognition of that equal status by the other states in the system, okay? And from that perspective, most scholars would argue that UN is very important because you can lobby in the UN. And by lobbying in the UN, you can get recognition as a state. So what Turkey has done when it was one of the temporary members of the council was to lobby for Palestine, okay? Because Turkey actually wants Palestine to be recognized. There are several other states that want Palestine to be recognized as an independent sovereign state. So sovereignty has something to do with recognition, guys. Don't confuse it with independence. So independence is just one of the traits of a nation state, and sovereignty is just another. They're not the same thing, okay? You can actually, I did actually talk about it not being a norm, not being a law, it's a norm. You can actually read more on this in Stephen Krasner's work. He has studied sovereignty to a large extent. He actually talks about several different aspects of sovereignty. And he also questions if sovereignty is indeed eroding in the world, okay? So, any questions? Anything unclear? You're doing fine. Okay. Oh, okay. I don't know what I did with the presentation today. All right. Now, I'm going to compare, or I'm going to talk a little bit about feudalism. For this, the Turkish students here, you probably have heard a lot about feudalism in high school years, and probably not since. And I'm going to bring you to your high school years. I don't know how much you guys learn the topic in college, do you? Well, you're a management student, so. Okay, you didn't actually get into it. Okay. You're from, where are you from? What? California. From California. Okay, so I think, to my best knowledge, in the US, you actually learn about European history. A little bit. Okay, all right. So I'm actually going to get into the details of it, so you guys will be fine, okay? Okay, for those who have actually learned about feudalism, what is feudalism? Yes.
Like you say, it's personal. So I'm a farmer or something living somewhere, and then I have this lord that is my protector, and he assures my safety, and I have kids and taxes, and then he is another lord, and all the way up as well.
Okay, so your loyalty is pretty much personal. Whoever provides you security, you're loyal to that person. If that is a lord that protects you for a while, great. But you don't necessarily stay loyal to the same lord for the rest of your life, okay? It depends on who's more powerful, who's more able to provide you with security, okay? So we're talking about a time before well, after the Roman Empire comes to an end, in the Middle Ages, feudalism is pretty much what we see in Western Europe. And maybe you took courses that said, well, Ottoman Empire was very different than feudalist system because the Ottoman Empire was more central when the feudalist system in Europe was more dispersed, was more decentralized. That's probably what you remember from your high school years, right? Okay, this is what we learn in Turkey. Well, Ottoman Empire was not as central as everyone actually thinks, and it didn't become a central empire as early as everyone thought. So there was definitely an element of decentralized system in Ottoman Empire as well. But feudalism is different than what we see in the Ottoman Empire in other aspects, guys. In feudalism, the most important part of feudalism is about loyalty. So in this sense, in this system, I provide your security, so you're loyal to me. But tomorrow, if I get sick in this class, and if I can't provide you security anymore, and they send you another professor, are you going to stay loyal to me? Yes. Kıvanç will. And it's just him who will stay loyal. But for the rest of you, all of you will say, okay, you know, it's someone else who's teaching IR347 anymore. And so Kıvanç is going to commit suicide. So the loyalty then in that situation is quite changing depending on the circumstances. Okay, so in feudalism then, the loyalty is as long as your personal interests and your families and your close families' interests are served. If I don't serve your interests anymore, I'm not your lord anymore. And here's another thing. The lord can be loyal to a king one day and probably not so the next day. Okay, and there are knights in this system. Oh, we actually have 3 musketeers. It just started on Friday, actually, and it's 3D2, for your information. So what did you see in 3 musketeers? They're the knights, and they are loyal to the king, but there were many other lords and knights that are not loyal to the king. So guys, king is not that strong, okay? So everything is on ad hoc basis. King might become more strong at times, but that is not the usual affairs of things. All administration is quite local, and in that sense, the center is quite weak. Okay? When I say center, I'm talking about the king. So think of England. So that you have a king in England, but at the same time, you have several strong lords. And some of them are loyal, and some of them are not. Now, when I talk about all administration is local, I'm not only talking about loyalty. I'm also talking about, where's my economics student? I'm also talking about economy. Okay. So economic relations are also quite local. The king wants taxes, but the taxes will sometimes come and sometimes not. Okay? Compare this with the state system today. When you don't pay your tax, ideally, you're going to be caught and you're going to pay an extra punishment, or you will even be imprisoned for not paying your taxes. In feudalism, the punishment mechanisms of the center is not that strong. For that reason, you're kind of doing what the current circumstances is telling you what to do, okay? And because the center is weak in economic relations, remember I told you that the Roman Empire was very strong, both economically and militarily, and politically. That's what centrality did to the Roman Empire. But in the case of the feudalist system in Europe at the time, you don't have that, okay? And because you don't have that, economy is not as good as it could be in a central government. And let me tell you one more thing. You're trusting me to protect you, but in the meantime, you get attacked by your neighbor. And because the whole system is very dispersed and there aren't central courts, the best thing to do is probably to just kill who attacked you, or who attacked you will kill you, or you're going to hold grudges and you're going to kill that person later. So we're kind of talking about a system where everyone is responsible from its close family. And when security is provided at local level, that means you actually have to provide security for yourself as well, which means you actually have your swords and you can actually dwell with people and you can actually kill other people without much of a risk for punishment. So it kind of resembles quite a state of nature situation, right? So you are always afraid that someone will want something from you and you will get killed, or you will have to kill someone. So the whole security system is different than it is in a central system. This is something that I want you to remember. Everything is, almost everything is provided in local level. Does that mean that the king is worthless, doesn't do anything? Of course not. Sometimes the king actually sends his loyal knights and people to you, but that is not going to be very often. Will you see the king? Maybe once in your lifetime. So you're not lucky enough to have access to the king all the time in this system. So it lacks stable and permanent institutions, court system, right? Or a permanent economic system, a taxing system. All these things do not function so well in the feudalist system. So there are institutions in the sense that the Lord's guys come to tax you, but in the meantime, the system is not stable and it's not permanent, so there is no, I would say, routines that you would expect. All right. As a result, no permanent government institutions. Everything is in personal loyalty basis. So as a result, you come to me and you ask me to just punish Selay because she did something to you. But in the meantime, she ran away. So all you need to do at that point is to use force yourself, which means the feudalist times is kind of like a Texas kind of environment where you have your own weapon and you're going to go after Selay and you're going to actually get whatever you want from her after killing her, of course. So guys, I've said a lot about killing and dying, and that's because it's quite natural. So the lifespan of a human being is not 70, 80 years as it is today. Okay, at the time. So the lifespan is shorter, and the citizens have the right to use force to protect themselves. We came to the most important part, which is multiple and overlapping layers of authority. Okay. What does that mean? What's overlapping layer of autonomy? It's fancy, I know, but what does it mean? Overlapping and multiple layers of authority. Yes?
Because there's no definite territory, so multiple authorities.
There are multiple authorities because you know what? I say that I have the right to rule in this territory, and then who were the Magnus and Orkun say, I'm strong, no, I have the right to authority here. Okay? So we're competing among each other for the authority in this same territory. And in the meantime, let's just say that I'm a French lord, okay? But at the same time, I actually get money from the King of England to secure a certain piece of land that is in France. Because there is not yet a nation state of France, the borders are up for grab, okay? So the King of England can actually go to the French lord and say, do this for me. And the French lord will not be loyal to the French king, instead will do whatever the English king wants him to do. It sounds weird to you today, because today you're actually born into a nationalist nation-state system. There's no nationalism at the time. There's no nationalist loyalties at the time. Can you imagine it? Well, from today on, everyone will go watch the Three Musketeers to understand what the whole thing looks like, probably. It is a good idea, too. It's a different world, guys. It's a different system, different world. We don't understand it today, but at the time, the clergy can be loyal to one king or another lord from different nationalities. Okay? So the religious loyalty is also not very strict, in the sense that there are clashes between your national loyalty and religious loyalties. As I said, nationalist ideology will come into the scene much later. When? Do you remember when? With the French Revolution, Napoleonic Wars, and remember conscription and all. There are centuries until that. We're not there yet. So these guys actually do not know who the authority is. And when they do know who the authority is, they're not necessarily loyal to one authority. So there are many overlapping identities. As a Frenchman, as a wealthy landowner, these are loyalties, these are identities that are overlapping. But in the meantime, as a wealthy landowner, you might be loyal to the French king, but as a different identity, with a different identity, you can be loyal to the English king, okay? So we are talking about a localized system. We're talking about a system where people are on their own mostly, and they're providing their own security. And in the meantime, they're kind of pragmatic in the sense that they're loyal to whoever is providing the most to all of their identities at the same time. Any problems, issues, questions, anything? Do I have more time to go into this?
Feudalism just basically made me think that it's opposite to what we today call globalization. Exactly the opposite.
Or is it?
It sounds like not much local, not too much communication.
Why do you think that is? Let's connect this to something we have actually discussed in the historical background. What was one of the things that I told you will come up within this course? State building, economic development, and military and technological revolution, right? So you don't have that yet. You don't have the technology to actually move from one place to another fast. So in that sense, you actually are stuck. So in feudal systems, wherever you were born, you probably don't go more than 10, 20 kilometers ahead of it. Okay? So that is kind of like against what we think of globalization, true. Because in a globalized world, you travel everywhere. But in the meantime, may I ask you an interesting question? Can be an exam question even. In a globalized world, again, you have several different identities, right? And your loyalty, again, is kind of dispersing. You're not loyal to one thing anymore in a globalized world. I am quite loyal to my iPad in this globalized world. I depend on it. So what does that mean? That means I can pretty much be this loyal to any Turkish products that are produced in Turkey, right? Because I like this one, and it is not a Turkish product. So my loyalty then, in terms of what I'm going to work with for an tablet, what do you call it, a tablet computer?
PC.
Tablet PC, okay. So my tablet PC loyalty is not to my own country. It is to this American brand that I'm using today, okay? So loyalties in a globalized world, I think, are also dispersed. There's several different identities we all take upon, okay? So isn't that kind of similar to a local system in the feudalist era where you have multiple overlapping authorities? So let me ask you, we just said that Turkey has to abide by the European rules, European practices and the court in banning political parties, or not banning political parties. So how about overlapping authorities? There's the Turkish government's authority, there's the EU court's authority. For EU member countries, that's even more so, right? I mean, we're just a candidate country. Sometimes we don't do what the EU wants, and then we say, we don't care. EU doesn't accept us, so we can actually do whatever we want. We have that luxury still, because we're not member. But for the member countries, there is not that luxury at all. So you are talking about EU and sovereign states' identities overlapping in multiple identities. And on top of that, you have personal loyalties and you have family loyalties, you have, I don't know, environmental loyalties and all sorts of loyalties. So I kind of think that the feudal system may not be exact opposite of a globalized world.
No, when you put it that way, yes.
When I put it that way, now they have common traits. I would recommend you not to think of these things in absolute terms, okay? Because nothing really is completely the exact opposite of another era, another concept, or so always think of the gray areas, okay? Especially in this course. This is not a course where you can apply the black or white logic. I'm not going to get into this. So if you don't read Sprout by Thursday, you're actually going to be quite unhappy because you're not going to understand the word that I'm saying, okay? So read Sprout. Thank you. Westphalia states believed that sovereignty is the only way that will stop the fighting in Europe, okay, between great powers. So no one wants to fight. If you don't want to fight, the norm then is, do not interfere in my affairs. I'm not going to interfere with your affairs. But in the meantime, sovereignty has two components, internal and external. On the one hand, you can order your domestic affairs in any way that you want as the state, as long as you're legitimate, okay? And then the external component says everyone, every state in the international system has the same status. So if we go back to our discussion before the break, you were saying you don't believe that some states are, that the United Nations is very fair because some states are more powerful than others. The answer to that would be, from a sovereignty perspective, the answer would be, law is enforced usually, and there are punishment mechanisms to enforce laws. But norms are not like that, right? So not to be late to class is, okay, not to be late to class is a law. At least from today on, it's a law. If it was a norm, it would be very polite not to be late, not to come in when the professor is talking. So a norm would not necessarily be enforced through punishment, but there is a social understanding in norms, okay? That's how a norm and a law are different. So sovereignty is not a law, so there is no enforcement of punishment if you violate sovereignty. But at the same time, it's a norm, and all states abide by the norm of sovereignty, because by this okay, so what was, when did sovereignty become a norm of international relations? We mentioned in the historical background. What was the event that created the norm of sovereignty? What is the most important historical event you learned in the IR department in your courses? Okay, so, so I asked the question that way, you know. Okay, Westphalia is known to create the norm of sovereignty. Now I say norm of sovereignty, not a law. Why is that? What's the difference between a norm and a law? Not necessarily, but laws can beat the hell out of you, okay? But still, in this international system here, you have the same status as they do, okay? You might be weaker, but that has nothing to do with the status of the individual states within the state, within the international system, okay? So you're all sovereign. You can do whatever you like, and no one can interfere in your affairs. Oh yeah, he's stronger, but that doesn't add anything to his sovereignty. So the norm of sovereignty is established to ensure that all of you have the same status, so that you're not going to interfere with each other's affairs, so that you will do whatever you deem is necessary inside your borders. But on the other hand, people argue, there are IR scholars who argue that because Magnus is stronger than you, he actually violates your sovereignty and nothing happens. That is the argument. Of course, some states might be more powerful, but in the system, the rights that states have are equal, not their power levels, okay? So some states are stronger, others are weaker, but they have the same status in international law. Do you see the difference? So in this classroom, Orkun might be extremely strong. He goes to gym every day, and so does Magnus, okay? But, okay, I'm not going to pick guys for the example anymore. Can I pick you instead? Okay. So you don't go to the gym all the time, so you're not as strong, okay? Strength then of the states in the system might differ. But in the meantime, you're all students. In the meantime, in the class of IR347, you all have the same status. But the fact is, if they want, Orkun and Magnus